Hi, folks. It's Dr. Holly Lucille here with Healthy Happenings and Natural Partners. I cannot wait to get started in our conversation. We're going to be talking about everything heavy metals, and I've got the guy to do it with, Dr. Chris Shade, PhD from Quicksilver Scientific. Dr. Shade, hi.
Hello, Holly Lucille. Always happy to be here with you.
Buddy, listen, people have been going crazy that we're going to have this conversation, or that I was going to have this conversation with you, and you're going to provide the answers because it's a hot topic. But seriously, you're very well respected and very loved out there. I just want you to know that.
Oh, I like to hear that. Every time I hear it, I'm still happy.
All right, so let's get down to it. I want to talk about heavy metals, in probably particular mercury, but you can drive this conversation. How prevalent is the toxicity that we have in our bodies?
Well, it's a lot more prevalent than we would like it to be. And, maybe in a way it's going down a little bit because if we talk mercury, there's two main sources, mercury amalgam and fish. And mercury amalgam is sort of on its way down, at least in how many times we put it in. It's being replaced with the white porcelain or the white composites, and so less and less mercury is going in. But if you have dental mercury, you have some degree of toxicity. If you eat fish, you have some degree of toxicity. Now, there's relative and absolute, and it's going to depend how much fish do you eat. What level, how high on the food chain. The bigger fish higher up the food chain. The swordfish and tuna have over up to 1,000 times more mercury than something like a kipper or a sardine or an anchovy, and so it's a very relative scale there. And then how many amalgams you have, and that's going to dictate how much is getting into you. And then it's how good is your body at dealing with that, and that's just mercury. Then we have lead, and sort of our generation, we are all exposed to a lot of lead. There's the younger kids, I don't see lead as much, but anyone 40 and above, lead is a pretty common factor in things, and it builds into your bones and it stays with you for a long, long time. And then you've got arsenic and cadmium. Joe Pizzorno's lately been beating the drum on arsenic, and that's. Yeah, he's doing a great job with that. But that's a groundwater toxin. It's in rice. It's in fish, especially the lower, down the food chain fish. So, you eat bottom feeders, you get arsenic. You eat top feeders, you get mercury. And then there's cadmium, and that's, coming from a variety of sources. The smokers are getting that. It's in exhaust. One of the most tragic things in cadmium is that municipalities will give away little plots of crappy land near highways to people who want to start organic farms, and it all deposits on those leafy vegetables, and you're eating all this kale and collards, and you think you're doing good, and you're eating cadmium all the time. So there's plenty of it.
Such an uplifting conversation thus far. I mean, you're talking about, plant-based vegetable, diet, and it's all for crap because we're getting so much of the stuff in. But I want to get to testing in a second. But first of all, with your mentioning of all of these different heavy metals, when they get inside of our bodies, and let's say we're toxic from them, not dealing with them very well on an individual basis, what are some of the things that you see as a result of this condition?
I'd say the biggest two things that happen, and there's lots of little places. It's like where in the chain is the weak link and where do they break? But the most pervasive things are in energy generation and your neurological space. And so energy generation, mercury, cadmium, and arsenic all nail the mitochondria. There's specialized enzymes that you'll have, especially enzymes in the glutathione family. You have one form in the cytoplasm and a different form in the mitochondria. And they're made to be in the mitochondria because you have all these respiratory bursts and all of these reactive oxygen species. And so it's like, nature designed them to handle these hits of the oxygen, but it came at a cost. They're more susceptible to the hit from mercury, cadmium, and arsenic. And so mitochondria are very easily hit by heavy metals, and that makes you generate less energy. The thyroid accumulates a lot of heavy metals, and the most documented thing that it does is it blocks the conversion of T4 to T3.
It binds up that selenium that's so absolutely necessary for that conversion. Both, I think, mercury and cadmium will bind up that selenium, also poor in our soils as well.
mercury, cadmium, and arsenic all do it, and they're bonding up selenium. That's actually more of the antioxidant protection in the thyroid, but the deiodinase, the enzyme itself that's pulling the T4 to T3 is directly inhibited by mercury, cadmium, and arsenic. So when you look at labs and you see like a normal or high normal T4, but the T3 is low normal or low, then you can look at these metals having done that. And so they accumulate there in prostate for men. And so it's just slowing down, weakening, causing you tiredness, affects the adrenals. We don't know all the mechanisms there, but it definitely weakens adrenals. And then in the neurological space, there you're creating cycles of anxiety and depression, and you're creating neuroinflammation. And those toxins go right after the glutamate receptors in the brain, and they make the brain feel like it's seeing more glutamate than it normally would. So it's hypervigilant, but when it goes too much, it creates fear. And because glutamate creates vigilance, it creates memory, but memory historically is based on fear of what's going to kill you. And so back to our Rosie story, it makes us into this cycle where we always think that everything's ready to kill us, in a metaphorical sense. And that's what anxiety is. And then once that pumps long enough, it's creating a lot of free radicals. And so there becomes a brain fog, and then a cascading down into a cycle of depression. And it very easily activates that cycle of neuroinflammation, where the microglia and the glutamate receptor are sort of antagonizing one another and bringing the kind of immune response you would have in the rest of your body up to your brain, and that's very damaging.
And so what you're saying here, and what I picked up is so many clinical conditions you could tease out of this that people could present with, whether it's just fatigue, depression, memory loss, anything with protracted thyroid function when you have symptoms of hypometabolism. I say, as a clinician, we've got to identify and treat the cause. Where are the obstacles to cure? So I think in our modern day, it is necessary for folks to get their heavy metals tested, and for practitioners to be doing more and more environmental testing, because it's pervasive and ubiquitous, and it's in our tissues. What's the best way to test?
Yeah, so I mean, this is like a big thing for me because I've lectured on this for years, and people are so ingrained in doing the same thing all the time that they just keep switching back all the time to, we do the challenge test. We do the challenge test because it tells you body burden. Well, let me tell you right now, it does not. And, when I was developing the testing that we do, I looked through. In fact, I started doing challenge testing, and I got sick. I got a lot of other people sick doing it, and I found it wasn't working for certain people. They weren't showing any metals when I knew they had them, and I did a lot of research on literature that had looked at the challenge test. And what the challenge test did is take what your levels already were and just elevate them. So if there's a linear relationship between mercury in the blood, inorganic mercury in the blood, and urinary mercury, when your kidneys are working okay. And so for a given amount of mercury in the blood, you get a certain amount of mercury in the urine. And now we give you a chelator, and now you dump a bunch from the blood into the urine, and that level goes up, let's call it 10x. Now, 30 years ago, you couldn't measure the baseline. The technology wasn't good enough. So you had to 10x it or 30x it just to get it up into a window where you could read it. And that was fine because we didn't have the technology to look real cleanly at the low levels. But there's dialogue grew that it was showing you the body burden, and there's no mercury in the urine until you chelate it out, and there's nothing in the blood till you chelate it out. And this dialogue, this narrative that grew around it was a mythology, and it just built this whole idea of challenge testing. And then once you're doing something, you're always making excuses for why you do it, and so everybody's still stuck on that. But it's actually not true. If you have good enough testing technology, you don't need to 30x it to see it. And so I prefer For the blood, we use the testing that we do called the Mercury. I'm sorry, for mercury, we use the Mercury Challenge. Jesus. All right, go back a second. We use the Mercury Try Test. Rewind, get less excited, move forward. We use the Mercury Try Test, which does blood, hair, and urine, and uses mercury speciation, where we separate different forms. Because the form from fish and the form from amalgam, the fish form is called methylmercury, and from amalgam it's called inorganic mercury. They move through the body differently, and they're excreted differently. The fish form doesn't go into the urine unless it's breaking down into that amalgam form, which it does. The amalgam form goes into the urine, but only if the kidneys aren't damaged. And really, that test is the only test that really adequately looks at microtubule transport of toxins. Everybody looks at glomerular filtration, but the mercury going into the urine has nothing to do with that. Your GFR can be perfect. It's actually in the microtubules, you have the same transport molecules. They're phase 3 transporters called OATP that pulls it into the renal epithelial tissue, and then the MRP2 dumps it into the urinary stream. And that's how mercury gets in. And those can be very easily damaged, or they can have SNPs that weaken their function that nobody measures. And so that's all happening there. And this urine to blood ratio using the Mercury Try Test is the only way that you can see that. So once you separate forms and you look at all the levels, you get great information about the body.
I've seen this test before, the Mercury Try Test, folks. And I think another thing that you said that's so important, especially for the consumer, for the patient, is that it does identify where your mercury is coming from. If you know where it's coming from, you know how to avoid it.
Exactly. Yeah. You got source, you got excretion patterns, you know not just how to deal with the inputs, but what might be the hitch in the export. And you can address that then in the detox system. Yeah. And now let's go to the other metals. Now let's take away the idea of the challenge test, and then you just do a whole blood metals panel. And then you're getting the nutrients, the nutrient elements, and the detox cofactors along with the toxin elements. So in our blood metals panel, you've got calcium and magnesium. You've got copper and zinc. You've got selenium and lithium and manganese. And all of those are super important to see that you have enough of them and that you have balance, because we all know calcium magnesium ratios are super important. Yeah, copper, zinc, man, when copper is in excess of zinc, all your other metals are synergistically toxic. So you have this total map of metals, and then you get your toxins. You've got arsenic and cadmium. You've got mercury, non-speciated. It's more just if they eat a lot of fish, you can get a judge on how much fish fish mercury they're getting, but you have that in there. And you have lead, and those are the most crucial ones to have. And then, so there you have a whole map of the metal sort of life of your body.
Yeah, great. And you know, these tests have been so important for me as a practitioner, because it is so great when I can actually show my patients, this is why, and guess what? This is what we're going to do about it to help you feel better. We need to remove this potential contributing cause. So let's get to that last question. What's the best way when your body is inefficiently not getting these things out to quote unquote help the body detox from heavy metals?
Right. And so the old way to do everything was a chelator. It was going to be DMPS or DMSA or EDTA. And at the end, we'll say, well, you can move some of those in, but first thing you have to do is look at, why was your body not getting rid of them? Were you just exposed to a ton? Probably not likely. You likely have an exposure and a failure to excrete. And the excretion is all based around the glutathione system. So let's amplify the glutathione system. Yeah. And when we say the glutathione system, then there's 3 basic things. You have to have glutathione. You have to have activity of the phase 2 enzyme glutathione S transferase. Now, if we're inside a cell and we have mercury stuck to a protein, it doesn't just jump off and find the glutathione. There has to be an enzyme that's an intermediary that holds the glutathione, and it sort of pries the metal off of the tissue's binding site and allows it to flip over onto the glutathione. All right, so now we're in a cell and we have a mercury glutathione or cadmium glutathione complex. We got to get that out. Now, that doesn't passively diffuse. It is an active transport they're transmembrane transporters called phase 3 transporters that take that conjugate from the cell out into the blood. Well, really out into the extracellular matrix. And it's going to move through the lymph and then joined with the blood, and it'll be moving through the blood. And then you've got related transporters, the OATPs, at the liver and kidney that are going to pull them from the blood into their cells and then dump out through the MRP2. The MRP2 dumps into the bile tract in the liver, and in the kidneys, it's dumping into the urinary flow in the proximal tubules. Now, you have to make sure that all that stuff's working. And there's so many places that it can get hitched up at. My latest obsession is mostly at the liver, because the MRP2 doesn't just move toxin conjugates, it moves bile salts as well. And it works in concert with the bile salt export pump to move toxins and bile salts out into the bile flow. And if that is blocked in any way, you cannot move those toxins then out into the bile flow of the GI tract. And instead, a door called MRP3 opens and dumps those toxins into the blood, because the liver can, if it's building up toxins all the time, if it can't get rid of them, it's going to kill itself. And so as a safety mechanism, it dumps back into the blood. And this is the source of many of the detox reactions that you see, where you take things that rev up parts of the detox system but don't carry it all the way through. And so all of a sudden the liver's got all this baggage. It's just taken out of storage, it's taken out of the blood, it's revved it up, it's activated it, conjugated it, and it's got nowhere to go, so it dumps it back into the blood. Where's it going to go from there? Kidneys, brain, skin. You see rashes, you failed to keep bile flow going. You have kidney pain, you failed to keep bile flow going. You get excess brain fog, same thing. So working on bile flow, cholagogues, there's a torodeoxy. I forget what it is, but it's bear bile, but you can get it synthetically. Yeah, just whatever he said, We'll get back to it later. But anything that's going to help bile flow, and in fact, that's, we always talk about milk thistle for liver, and I found out that its most fundamental thing that it does in saving the liver is not upregulating the enzymes. It does some of that, but it anchors the transporters into the canalicular membrane so they don't get pulled out during a high toxic event. So they keep dumping stuff out of the liver, so the liver's not left holding the bag. So that was my little tangent on this bile flow thing. But we have to get that whole system up. So we said we need glutathione. So I use liposomal glutathione because usually when people are sick, their enzymes for making glutathione have been compromised. So just giving them precursors, which works in a healthy person, might not work in a sick person. So it has to be very high quality liposomal glutathione. The bad glutathiones are mostly hydrogen sulfide. The good ones really work. And then you need to upregulate phase 2. So these are some of the superfoods that we think of. My favorite is our lipoic acid for upregulation there, but then all the polyphenols do. So green tea extract, pine bark extract, red wine extract. I use a lot of haritaki, which is not a mushroom. It's actually a fruit from Ayurveda. It's often found in Triphala, which is a GI formula. So all the polyphenolic antioxidants work, and then the certain sulfur compounds called isothiocyanates that you find in crucifers, like sulforaphane and broccoli sprout extract. I forget the one in isothiocyanate, allyl isothiocyanate is in wasabi and in English hot mustard. That works. And then the sulfur compounds in garlic. And don't get deodorized because it's actually the stink that works. And a lot of the compounds in the other alliums work as well. So those are good for upregulating phase 2. You've got glutathione as a liposome and maybe some precursors. And then for phase 3, anything that stimulates bile flow, plus you need get that out, get it dumping out, and then you need to catch the toxins with a binder in the GI tract or the liver stops dumping. So you need binders to pull the metals out. We use IMD, which is our intestinal metal detox, which is a thiol functionalized silica. And then we have a broad cocktail of binders called Ultra Binder, which has charcoal, clay, chitosan, which is a non-allergenic shellfish derivative, which is a molecular mimic for Welchol. So the things that cholestyramine and Welchol do in binding different biotoxins, that does that. So charcoal clay, chitosan, IMD is in that, and then a whopping dose of acacia gum to help deal with GI lining distress. Acacia gum is a really good gum. It's a bifidogenic prebiotic, as well as helping with leaky gut. So grab it, tag it, throw it, catch it, get it out.
Yeah, grab it, tag it, throw it, catch it, get it out. All right, folks, when you stay on 10 minutes later after we shut down, I'm going to be translating every single thing that Shane said in very simple form. So, you totally bummed me out at the beginning, but then you totally made me hungry here at the end, talking about wasabi and green tea extract and red wine extract and all that great stuff. But Dr. Shea, thank you for your time. Thank you for your expertise. Thank you for all that you do. Folks, you can find out more about the testing and the detoxification processes that Dr. Shea talked about at quicksilverscientific.com. All right, folks, until next time on Healthy Happenings, we'll see you later.
How long does it take him to cut?
This is the worst part.
Now we're very comfortable staring at each other.
Throw a pencil into the... All right, buddy. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks so much. It was great to hang with you guys. It was great to see you again, Holly. And I'll see you at IFM if I don't see you before.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Bye-bye.